You sit here and you listen to 2 days of people who are doing amazing things all the time. And it's very hard to bring someone else out to top the person you've just heard. And somehow Randy manages to do that. And then another person comes out and tops that person. And then I come out and say, I have nothing compared to what they've done. But I will tell you that one of the things that made the most impression on me back about 25, 30 years ago was one of the very earliest episodes of Saturday Night Live. And there was a takeoff. They were doing one of their advertising spoofs, and it was a takeoff of the 21st century modern woman making a difference in the world today. And they showed a woman walk with 3 bags of groceries into a 5,000 square foot kitchen that was immaculately clean. Her hair was perfect, her makeup was perfect. She put down the bag of groceries, looked in the camera, and she said, "Hi, I'm an astrophysicist and a mother of 4. And she started to unpack the groceries, and she looked at the camera and she said, "Oh yes, I volunteer at the hospital, and I run the carpool." And she kept unpacking the groceries and looked at the camera and she said, "What's that? Oh, my favorite hobbies? Well, those would have to be skydiving and deep sea diving." And she finished unpacking the groceries and she folded the bags very neatly and opened up a cabinet with 2,000 neatly folded and stacked bags, looked back at the camera and she said, "What's that? Oh, you want to know how I do all of this? I'm on speed." That had a tremendous influence on me. And the fact of the matter is that, as it turns out, since about 35 years ago, we've realized that we're all on speed. Because what the story is about now is the rapidly, geometrically increasing speed of change. And as we hurtle as fast as we do into the 21st century, change is coming faster and faster and faster. And it kind of seems overwhelming. What I do on a regular basis is a lot of scanning. I do a lot of reading, try to understand the social, the economic, the political, the technological, the demographic, the environmental trends that are going to shape our future and how they're going to intersect with each other. And there's no question but that we are entering into an age of complexity. And that complexity can serve to overwhelm us sometimes. But I want to help you put complexity into a kind of framework. Frequently, the word complex is used as a synonym for the word complicated. They are 2 very different things, completely different things. Complicated is a closed system. It's linear, it has fixed elements, and it has constrained dynamics. So a jet engine, for example, would be complicated. Complex, on the other hand, is open. It's nonlinear. It's unconstrained in terms of its dynamics, and they are subject to externalities which can change at any time, go through rapid transformation at any time, and even lead to chaos. If we think about doing business in a multinational world, that's complicated. If we think about doing business in a global world, that's complex. And they are 2 very different things. If we think about financial derivatives, they're complicated. If we think about the networked grid that links all of the financial systems together and affects everything else, that's complex. We have 3 solutions out there in the future, potentially, for this overwhelmingly complicated and, more importantly, overwhelmingly complex world that we are entering into. The first is what many call the singularity. Some of you may have heard that term, but the singularity refers to a time when those software and hardware things that we create will surpass the ability of us, the wetware, in so many ways, leave us behind. Because we cannot think as fast, we cannot react as fast, we cannot decide in such a complex world, given all the variables. Well, we're not quite sure what these things would be, whether they would have a sense of morality, whether they would have a sense of ethics, whether they would have anything that we might attribute to a soul, whether they would be superhuman in some way, look like humans but look like superhumans, or whether they would be very machine-looking things. We have no idea. But there are lots of people working in many laboratories around the world on approaching that singularity. On the other hand, the second possibility is the evolution of the human brain. Maybe our brains will evolve to a point where we can process all of this complexity. We may have to augment our brains with chips or whatever, but we can perhaps get there. And if you look at younger people today, it's interesting because there's a bad news, good news kind of situation. The bad news that we always hear, and we continue to hear, is that they are being cognitively suppressed because of their dependency upon the social media and the interactivity of the technology that they use. On the other hand, we know that they can process and multiprocess much more quickly and more quickly than we can in many ways. And then the third possibility is what is called the collective or web-based or somehow global human consciousness. Some people call that the noosphere, spelled N-O-O-S-P-H-E-R-E. Some people call it the omega point. But you have to have tremendous faith in the wisdom of crowds if you believe that everything in the future will be solved by all of us dumping our minds together in some way and accessing that to be able to solve our problems. So in the absence of those three things, right here, right now, in this arena, when we are challenged to think about making a difference in the world, somehow we have to figure out how we're going to do that as we live with ambiguity, because we don't know all the answers. They are not so clear. In fact, everybody talks about one of the cute sort of cliches going around is that the most important thing is that we don't know what we don't know. And we don't. And in fact, most of the models we depend upon don't really help us, because a model is designed by its very nature to leave out the things that we don't know. And that's why many of them don't work and don't help us. So I just want to say that we don't really have a grasp on the magnitude of the importance of little things that we do all the time. We know that there are tremendous ripple effects. Edward Tenner's law of unintended consequences, usually meant to be negative, also positive. The fact is that everything that happens has consequences, and those spin out and have ripple effects. And you've all heard of the analogy of the butterfly flapping its wings somewhere in the world, and as a result, after spinning that out, number of iterations of impact, you wind up with a hurricane somewhere else in the world. And if you think that that's ridiculous and you say, okay, that's just an exaggeration, might I remind you that Mark Zuckerberg, being ticked off that his girlfriend broke up with him, eventually led to the downfall of Mubarak in Egypt. There is a futurist named David Pearce Snyder who coined the term, along with his brother, complexopacity. Complexopacity. He defines it, he says, complexopacity is a person's or organization's threshold for assimilating or addressing complex ideas, systems, problems, situations, interactions, etc. He says complexopacity increases with age throughout childhood and maturity, and then decreases in later years. I'm not sure I completely agree with that. I think that there are many things that as we get older, we just don't want to deal with because they seem too complex. But on the other hand, I think that we grow a kind of wisdom as we get older that allows us to understand that things are complex and that there are implications and responsibilities and all kinds of spin-outs that younger people don't necessarily accept to be so. So I'm not sure I totally buy that, but I know where he's going. He's basically saying that as we get older, our brains find it harder and harder to deal with complexity. Our brains do a lot of strange things as we get older. One of the things that I love that our brains does is that it doesn't matter how old you are here in this audience. Doesn't matter. Once you turn 21, you think all the new music stinks. Your brain does that because it's probably solidified a whole lot of things by that time, music being one of them, and it just is not comfortable with what comes after. One of the things that Snyder found out was that Montessori and Waldorf schools appear to produce better equipped people in terms of complexity. That in dealing with complexity, they seem to teach better. But he also says that duress is necessary. For people to really be able to exercise complexipacity, they have to have experienced duress. Somehow that charges us up to be able to deal with complexity. And if that's the case, I win. Well, I can't say that, not after Somali was here. But I certainly came from a history of duress. I think a number of you heard me last year and know that I told you then that I grew up in foster homes. My mother had multiple sclerosis and could not care for us. My father was much older, and we were farmed out to foster homes by the time I was 3 years old. And I grew up in a series of foster homes. And the interesting thing to me was that even though I was always an A student in school and I would always bring home these great report cards, nobody ever cared as long as I got my chores done. And no matter what I accomplished as a child, nobody cared as long as I got my chores done. And so I often wondered, where am I getting this motivation? Where is it coming from? How come I am trying to do my best when there's no feedback telling me that this is a good thing that I'm doing? And I used to have to always go inside myself and look for the answers. And that was true throughout the rest of my life. I always was the first to do something, to create something, to build something, to start something, and to run something. And I always used to go back into myself and wonder, where does that come from? How does a person get there to be so self-motivated? Because I was always improvising and always figuring things out on the fly, even when they were very complex. I started 7 nonprofit organizations, and I didn't know what I was doing each time, but I just improvised. And I ran a number of nonprofits, some of which many of you may know. I didn't know what I was doing, but I improvised. And that was my life story when I started my business. I improvised. And I think the future really is about improvisation. Because in a complex world, we're not going to know all the answers. So we're going to have to kind of take some risks. And I know that the idea of taking a risk to some people is very unpalatable. But I will tell you that in high school, I did get some positive feedback. I was named by the foster care agency as the foster child of the year. And as my prize, they sent me on a tour of New England in a tour bus with 60 people all over the age of 65. And I was sitting on a dock on Martha's Vineyard and looking up at the stars. And I realized several things. And these 2 things have guided me through my life. The first, when you consider all the stars in the universe and how insignificant in the end the Earth is, so tiny. When you think about all the billions of people who've ever lived on Earth throughout its history, when you think about all of the women and how many eggs each woman carried, all of the men and how many sperm each men carried, that one should have met one of those eggs, one of those sperm, and created you. You. Here, now, that body, that presence, that spirit. You've already won the biggest lottery in the entire universe. When you realize that, you realize that all the rest of it becomes about how you're going to spend your winnings. And how sad it is to see people standing online to buy lottery tickets, hoping to change their life by winning the lottery, when they have already won the lottery with the greatest odds against them in the universe just by being here. And the second thing that I realized was that given how insignificant this planet is in that entire universe, and looking out into the distance and seeing the tiny dots of light that were gigantic ferries, I sat there on the dock realizing I am everything. I am everything. If I die right now, this all goes out with me. The universe, the ferries, the dock, bye-bye, curtains. I am the center of the universe. But I also realized I'm absolutely nothing. Given this grand scale of everything, I'm nothing. And when you come to the understanding that you are absolutely everything and you are absolutely nothing, you can do anything. You can take any risk. Because if you fail, who cares? It's your soap opera. Nobody else is tuned to your station. It's all about you in the end and nobody else. You're the center. You're the center. Whatever you see, whatever you want to change, don't wait. It's nobody else's responsibility. It's yours. So, in the end, what I want to say in the last couple of seconds remaining to the speaker part of this conference is this. Power is never something anybody gives you. It's always what you take. A wonderful story from 25 years ago, a woman who was named interim publisher of W Magazine. She was with Fairchild Publications for many years. She was delighted. She came into the board with a mock-up of her new idea of what W Magazine should look like. She said, I want this to be a very tall magazine, thick, glossy, spiffy. And the board patted her on the head and they said, honey, you can't box those magazines in the regular shipping crates. The trucks can't carry them in the regular way. Magazine racks can't hold them that size. And just remember, you're the interim publisher. We're looking for somebody permanent. And she said, you don't understand. I've already sold $10 million of advertising against this mock-up. And they said, honey, you're the publisher. So I just want to leave you with this. The future will happen with or without you. It will happen. And you, each one of you, have already won the lottery. Now it's a question of how you're going to spend your winnings, how you're going to make a difference, and how you, at your center, will become everything. Thank you.